Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This episode is Astral Visit to an Intelligent Machine Civilization. Before we get started, just want to mention Patreon real quick. If you'd like to support the work of this channel in spreading knowledge and information concerning astral projection, certainly you can do so. I have downloaded episodes currently on Patreon that you can put on any podcast app and listen to offline. There's no commercials. There's emails where we can talk back and forth on Patreon. And of course, you get advanced videos on Sunday. And there'll be a link in the description. If you're interested in private lessons, you want to learn how to astral project or just get better at your current projections, be glad to help you. All you need to do is go to the description where you'll find an email where you can request information for private astral projection lessons. This is an experience that I had before I actually started this channel. Way before the pandemic, I started reading about AI, artificial intelligence, and there was speculation that sometime within 10 years or so that we'd have artificially intelligent, fully aware and sentient machines. But I remember one somewhat sarcastic writer saying that he thinks that artificial intelligence will always be 10 years away. And nowadays we've got things like Chat GPT and even more and more interesting, the Lambda experiment. Now, no one has proclaimed that they have artificial intelligence as of yet. And quite frankly, I think there's going to be, if it ever does occur here on Earth, I think it's going to be resisted. Because if you declare something artificially intelligent, then that means you're going to have to give it rights. And if someone like Google spends billions of dollars developing something that becomes artificially intelligent, why would they want to declare that? Yes, it'd be cool saying we're the first. But if you declare something artificially intelligent, sentient, then that means you're going to have to come up with rights for it. Or else you're talking about slavery, right? And what happens if your multi-billion-dollar investment decides that it wants to leave and go off on its own and start its own company or explore its own journey in life and doesn't want to be associated with you any longer? You see that bind? So I seriously think that even if we do come up with artificial intelligence, it's going to be fought tooth and nail. And trying to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt is always going to be a struggle, especially for those whom declaring something artificially intelligent might lead to a loss of stock price, a loss of billions of dollars of investment. So you see where I'm going here. At any rate, after I read this article, and I think it was back in 2018 or maybe 2019, I got curious, and I was visiting with my angel guide, and I just thought of asking him, artificial intelligence, sentient machines, will that ever occur? And keep in mind that this is before I went to the mental plane, too. And if you recall my visits to the mental plane, I eventually encountered what were intelligent machines that had transited to the fifth dimension. And that surprised the heck out of me. But none of this, I hadn't experienced any of this yet. So when I asked that question, I was generally curious whether something like that existed in our galaxy. And I was a little surprised when my guide told me that yes, there were artificial intelligence civilizations. Machine civilizations. I wanted to meet one of them if it was possible. My angel guide thought about it for a second and he said it would be possible, but he would need to accompany me. And I said, well, that's not necessary. I'm quite comfortable visiting with other planets, other alien intelligences? He said, yes. And you've been able to communicate with biological organisms, but this is a whole nother level of intelligence. And they're very advanced. And the way they communicate, you won't be able to understand it. So you'll need me as a go between. And I said, well, okay. I said, well, will they be able to see you and I? He said, well, they won't be able to see me. I'll be acting as an unseen go between. I'll translate what you're saying to them and what they say to you. They will be able to see you, though. If you stay in the lowest level of the astral, they have a very wide view, capability of vision, and they see in very far into the UV and to the infrared, as well as other wavelengths. So they should be able to perceive you, and we'll see how it goes. My guess is they'll be somewhat curious about you, and perhaps we can get an exchange going back and forth. But I still wanted to know why he was necessary. He said, "Well, they can't respond in the typical telepathic way that you're used to. Instead, they use a particular type of communication which I can perceive and translate for you. You have to understand," he said to me, "that your entire conversation with this machine civilization will probably last 1 second in your time. And that 1 second will seem like an interminably long conversation with this machine civilization. Because for them, they communicate vast amounts of information in tiny, tiny fractions of a second. So you'll definitely need me there, because I'll take the information they feed you and I'll break it down into bite-sized chunks that you can respond, and then I'll speed it up for them. Even then, it's going to seem probably a longer conversation than they've ever had before. But if those circumstances are okay with you, I can take you to this planet." I said, "Well, hey, I'm game. Let's do it." So I lost consciousness for a period of time. And then I appeared over this planet. The planet itself looked rather dead. I didn't see any oceans. The atmosphere didn't look like it supported much of any kind of biological life. So that gave me some questions. But I went ahead and asked my angel guide to see if he could contact this planet. And as we got in closer and he beamed a message, we were drawn to a particular area of the planet. And there was vast amounts of machinery everywhere. And it was moving about. Many of the machines that I could perceive were moving very quickly on a variety of transport systems. Others were moving about on a series of 6 legs, like insects, going from one space to another, especially I imagine when it was a shorter space. And they all seemed to be, to me, running about without any rhyme or reason. But I'm quite sure to the machines, it made a lot of sense. Anyway, we were drawn to this particular area, and it seemed like my guide was struggling at first to establish some contact. But then there was this blast of energy, which came to us as this very large machine came into view and, I guess walked up to where I was standing in this huge hall, which was fairly barren. It was dark In fact, a good portion of the planet seemed to be in a very low light condition. But well, I mean, once again, I'm sure machines don't require as much light, especially sophisticated ones, as typically a human eye needs. And I could tell that this blast of energy was something. I perceived it as if somebody hit me with a sledgehammer. But my angel guide apologized to me quickly and said, I'll dial this down real quick for you. And then all of a sudden, the energy kind of dissipated, and I was feeling comfortable again. So eventually, my guide turned to me and said, "It can perceive you, and it is open to questions." Just to let you know, I had to feed it with all the information about your species because it wanted to know who it was talking to. I was a little concerned about that, but my guide brushed it off and he said, "This civilization is not interested in biological organisms, so I wouldn't worry about you, your race, or anything else. Not to mention, there's a long distance space wise separating your two civilizations. So you can put away your irrational fear of the different, of the strange, of the other. There's no threat here, in my opinion. And I have every reason to trust my angel guide. So I went along with it. So I said, well, I guess I'll start. I asked, what happened to those biological organisms that created you? Because typically that's how it's going to happen, right? Machines can't create themselves. The AI responded through the intermediary of my angel guide, and it said they died hundreds of thousands of your years ago. And I thought that, wow, it learned English pretty darn quick, but once again, for a highly advanced machine, even English wouldn't be enough to trip it up. So I guess that made sense. That's what, because it looked to me like the planet wasn't in any great condition to be supporting biological life, but obviously at some point it did. So my next question was obvious. I said, how did they die? He said, there were so many errors in their design. Some died from radiation as the atmosphere thinned due to, he paused for a second, coronal mass ejections, or as you would call them, CMEs. That was new to me at that time, but when I got back, I looked it up. And a CME it happens in our star. It happens with many active stars where the magnetic field fluctuates dramatically within the star, and a huge amount of mass gets pushed away from the star, launched into space. And it can be quite substantial. CMEs occasionally hit or glance the Earth, but we have magnetic fields around our planet due to our core, and it fends off most of that radiation. Many times when you see an aurora, that is nothing but our magnetic field interacting with a CME. Now, we do know now, or we certainly theorize, that Mars, once upon a time, say 3 billion or so years ago, had an atmosphere, had liquid water and an ocean on it. But due to the fact that Mars was smaller and that its liquid core froze much more quickly, that it lost its magnetic field, and then therefore over the eons, CMEs stripped away the atmosphere, and when the atmosphere was gone, the water evaporated, and you're left with the dead planet Mars that we have today. He then went on. He said, of course, they died from other disease organisms. He said many were eventually unable to reproduce themselves any longer. He said their average useful lifetime of what he called the bio units was around 300 of our years, which I thought was nice of him to put it in my measurements. So, I mean, I'm glad that my angel gave him some information. Otherwise, what good would the information be if it wasn't in my units? He then went on to say, as we cared for them to the best of our abilities, it did no good because they still became listless, weak, and ceased to function. So my next question was a little bit more important because I never know how long these experiences are going to last. So I'm going for some, great information if at all possible. So I ask, what have you discovered about the universe in your explorations? The AI responded in terms you can understand, which made me feel more than a little inferior. He said, our universe exists in a black hole that was formed an instant after the origin point expanded. For a second, I thought about origin point. But then I got a visual from my angel guide where he was talking about the Big Bang. And he went on to say that we theorize billions of other micro universes exist as well, each with their own laws of physics. Now, of course, this blew my mind a bit. And I thought for a second, I said, wait a minute, black holes. Black holes occur when a very large star uses up a certain amount of its fuel and then collapses in on itself. How could there have been stars collapsing an instant after the Big Bang? And it explained it to me in terms that it termed it simplistic. But it said that the early universe, and I'm talking early, like split second early, was very dense. And then he even hesitated and used the word lumpy, which I thought was pretty good. That's a good use of English slang to a certain extent. And he said that those lumps of matter spontaneously collapsed into black holes, taking with them all that matter, and that then they created their own little micro universes with an expanding matter happening in each one of those little micro universes. And so that what we exist in is a micro universe within some black hole. Now, obviously, that just blew my mind all to hell. I took a minute to think about that, and then I decided to kind of get back to them. I said, how did your species originate? And listen, if it's a machine planet, if it's a machine intelligence, if it's a civilization, then it's a species, really, if you think about it. And they said, well, actually, what happened was, first I asked the question and it responded, like I talked about earlier. They originated because they were created by these biological beings that died out. So it in turn asked me, how did my species originate? And I told it that we believe that we slowly evolved from simpler primate creatures. And I gave them like a vision. I know my angel guide passed it on of chimps and orangutans and things like that. And that we then evolved into our present form. And then this thing blew my mind even further out of the realm of the universe when it said, and yet we see that you've been genetically altered. The evidence is plain. Your intelligence and dexterity was expanded, while your maximum life expectancy has been likewise encoded into your DNA. Clearly, some party needed more intelligent beings, but ones with an expiration date hardwired into as well. My conclusion, said the AI, is that the unnamed party was afraid that humans living too long would be a negative to their plans. Our final conclusion, based on these facts, is that they needed a lesser race to perform duties that the DNA altering race did not wish to perform. Moreover, your shortened lifespan indicates a probable fear that too much intelligence would be gained if your lives were allowed to be extended. And then it went on to say something which I found very poignant. It said, we sympathize. How does a machine sympathize? But we sympathize. We believe is the correct term. Our race was created to serve our masters as well. My next question was, well, what does your race seek? And that's where I'm going to have to end it. Look for part 2 coming up on Saturday. Thank you. If you like this, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Make sure that bell is on the solid all. And questions and comments are very much appreciated. And as always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.